I remember that evening well, too well to believe that it was just one of many. The autumn was warm then, unnaturally warm, as if nature itself was trying to preserve the illusion that there was still peace in this house. I stood on the balcony of my parents' house with a glass of cheap wine that had once seemed exquisite, and watched the sun die on the horizon. There was music playing inside, something classical, wordless, and that was important because words would have destroyed the fragile balance of that night. At that moment, I already knew that she had taken everything. My younger sister, Vera. She had always been weaker, more needed, quieter. That was why she was loved. I was smarter, more decisive, tougher, and therefore inconvenient. I studied, built a career, protected those whom I myself later condemned for weakness. And she simply followed other people's decisions, like a leaf with the flow, and still got everything she wanted. Mark was mine. He wasn't perfect. I knew that right away. But with him, for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to be strong. I didn't have to prove anything. He listened, kept quiet, looked, as if there was something real behind my words. We met at a legal forum. He was a young prosecutor, and I was just starting to handle cases in the district court. We discussed everything: reforms, hopelessness, laws, and how they don't work. We had arguments, fights, kisses in the car after hard days. I allowed myself to believe that this story would be different, not like my mom and dad, not like most, where everyone just lives nearby because it's too late to change. And then she appeared, and it all ended so quickly that I didn't immediately understand when it began. They weren't hiding, not really. They just avoided looking me in the eye. Mark started coming home later, started saying he was tired more often, and fell silent more and more often when I was telling him something. And Vera, she laughed louder than usual and avoided talking to me one-on-one. I didn't want to believe the obvious. I couldn't. After all, I wasn't wrong about people, right? I'm a judge. I can see through a lie in a second. I can feel fear. I can hear when a person is hiding the truth. But, as it turned out, my own are something completely different. I found out everything by accident. An ordinary evening, his phone forgotten in the hallway. I didn't want to read it, honestly. But he blinked, and the first message was from her. "You overslept me today." No emoji, nothing obvious, but that was enough. I opened the correspondence, read everything. Their confessions, their meetings, their jokes, their plans. The last message was hers. "She won't notice anything, don't worry." I looked at the screen and felt an emptiness growing inside me. Not pain, number, not anger, just emptiness. As if all the emotions had left me through the open door, and I was standing there like a frame in which there was no longer a painting. They had betrayed me, both of them, without drama, without a fight. They had just quietly crossed me out, and I silently put the phone back. I didn't make a scene, I didn't scream, I just went to bed. In the morning, as always, I made coffee. Mark kissed my temple and said he had a meeting. I smiled and told him not to be late. He left, and I was left, alone, finally. I left 2 days later, without a note, without an explanation. I just disappeared. I moved to another city under the pretext of work. I didn't pick up the phone when they called. I didn't answer letters. And I didn't tell anyone that I knew. Let them live. Let them think they made it. Let them rejoice. 5 years passed. I became a district judge. I had no time for personal matters, for holidays, for calling my family. I was arranging the destinies of others while simultaneously losing my own. Until one day I received an invitation to an engagement party. The name in the subject line of the letter flared up like a blow to the chest. "Vera and Mark, we will be glad to see you." No apology, no explanation, just an invitation, as if nothing had happened. And at that moment I understood that you can't just leave, that there is a betrayal that can't be forgiven with silence, that revenge is not destruction, it is the restoration of justice. I didn't want blood. I wanted her to feel the same thing that she once made me feel: loss, helplessness, fear, for the ground on which she built her happiness to turn out to be shaky, and for someone to tell the truth at the moment when everyone is applauding and congratulating, and for it to be me. I am her judge. I didn't return to the city right away. That would have been too easy. Revenge, in my understanding, should never be a reaction to an emotional outburst. It should be like a court decision: cold, measured, legal in spirit, even if illegal in form. At first, I watched. A month? 2? I created a new profile on social media, neutral, without photos, where I indicated my job in marketing. I added her as a friend, knowing that Vera never turned people down. Her vanity was her weakness. She always loved the public. She posted every breakfast, every new manicure, every look from Mark, as if she wanted to convince herself that she deserved him. I looked at them like strangers. Vera blogged about couple harmony, an irony that would have been funny if it hadn't been so predictable. They filmed videos together, built the image of a successful family, emphasized trust and honesty as the basis of a relationship, especially honesty. I wrote everything down: habits, places they'd been, who they'd socialized with, where they worked, who they surrounded themselves with. I studied them like a dossier, not as people, but as pieces on a chessboard. They didn't know the game was on, and I wasn't going to be a player. I was going to be the board on which they'd collapse. I learned that Vera had opened her own jewelry store, or rather, rented space in a trendy neighborhood to look successful. But the business was losing money. Her blog was still doing nothing but barter collaborations. And Mark, he, like me, had risen. The prosecutor's office, first the district, then the department. He was visible, but not so high that he felt invulnerable. He was still a man who could be caught making a mistake. And as I found out, he had already made one. He was involved in an unofficial deal to reclassify the charges in order to gain political points. It was a dirty business, and I had the connections to find out about it. He thought everything was covered up. He forgot that I was not just an ex. I am a judge. I know how to wait and see. When I first returned to the city, it wasn't a meeting with them. It was a farewell to myself, to the woman who once stood at the window and tried to understand what she was guilty of. I rented an apartment not far from the center, modest, but quiet enough not to attract attention. I didn't tell anyone that I was back, not my colleagues, not my old friends. I didn't need participation. I didn't seek support. I wanted silence and control. Everything had to be slow, very slow. First a crack, then a tremor, and then a collapse. I started small. An anonymous letter sent to her advertising partner. There were screenshots of customer reviews complaining about poor quality of the product, which she hid. Bloggers hate negativity. A week later, the first collaboration was canceled. Vera pretended that everything was under control, but in her stories, I noticed, her makeup became thicker, her smile narrower. A month later, a complaint to the tax office. Her store did not declare part of its income. A small thing, but an alarming signal. And then I contacted a journalist, an old acquaintance, and gave him the documents on Mark's case. He did not know where they were from. He did not ask. He simply agreed to dig. None of this was revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't call them. I didn't threaten them. I just nudged them, gently, precisely, subtly. My goal wasn't to break them right away. I wanted them to start questioning the reality they'd built, to let the thought creep into every smile. What if someone knows? So that a crack would appear between them, and then silence. I knew that real pain wasn't in screaming. Real pain was in the silence, in the waiting, in the destruction of certainty. I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't relief. It was justice. I was restoring balance. I wasn't ruining their lives. I was simply taking away what they had stolen from me: peace, trust, dignity, And then one day, after months of silence, I saw the news. An engagement, a wedding in 3 weeks, a big celebration, a fancy restaurant, guests from all over the country, even a press release with a photo of the ring, with the caption, "A love story that has stood the test of time." I looked at the screen and felt no anger or pain, only determination. This would be their evening, their apogee, their pedestal. The wedding was to take place in a country complex called Villa Verona. Everything pompous about the name made me smirk. They didn't even try to hide how much they wanted to seem like someone they weren't. I imagined Vera wandering around the hall, telling the organizers where to put the photo zone, what the art should look like, what color the napkin should be. She always loved to play at maturity, pretending to know what she wanted, but at the same time, constantly needing confirmation. I was sure that this would be an evening for the public, for Instagram, for those who believed in her version of my life 5 years ago. I booked a hotel room near the venue, under a different name, of course, more precisely under my mother's maiden name, which no one had used for a long time. It was almost symbolic. I began to collect the materials I had been preparing for months into one folder, printouts of correspondence, screenshots from the archive, comments from former clients, quiet testimonies, connected by threads that might seem random, but not when I handed them over to the right hands. There was no direct accusation in each line, no malice, only facts, dry, neutral, like sentences written not by me, but by them. I planned not to talk, but to show, not to interfere with the evening directly, but to let them hear me from the outside. My plan was simple. Arrange it so that the video projector, set up for a romantic presentation of their love story, would suddenly show a different story, the one they had been carefully hiding, the one they wanted to erase. I knew the event coordinator. She had once lost a case in court in which I had taken part. It was not a conflict, just a case in which I had followed the law. But people remember those who prevent them from getting what they want. I wrote her a letter, polite, businesslike, with a hint, and I attached that very flash drive. I asked her to check, to replace the materials discreetly an hour before the ceremony. For this, she received an anonymous transfer to the card, and silence. The closer the wedding day came, the more pauses there were in my head. Not fear. I stopped being afraid a long time ago. But doubts. Was it that I was losing? Was it that this game had dragged on? Sometimes I woke up at night and caught myself thinking, what if I had left loudly then? Hysterically? Maybe I would have felt better. But I'm not like that. I don't know how to do it loudly. I know how to do it finally. 2 days before the wedding, I saw them in person for the first time. They came into the restaurant where I was having dinner, either by chance or by fate, to remind me of what I had gotten myself into. I was sitting in the corner under a hat and glasses I had never worn before. Vera was laughing. Mark was holding her by the waist. They didn't care who was watching. They had no fear, no shame. And that's when I realized everything I was doing was not out of revenge. It was out of truth. Because if they could show up in public places like this, after everything, making plans, inviting guests, accepting congratulations, then they really did need to be reminded of who they were. The night before, I stood in front of the mirror in my hotel room. I was wearing a black dress, not an evening gown, a strict one, the same one I wore to the first hearings of my judicial career. It fit perfectly, as if time had no power. I looked at myself for a long time, for the first time in years, without makeup, without a smile, without roles. I saw the woman who was taken away, and she returned. But not the same, not an avenger, but a judge. In the morning, I arrived at the venue an hour before the ceremony. Everything was decorated in pastel colors. Guests were greeted with glasses of champagne. A string quartet was playing on the lawn. Everything was so perfect that it seemed that nature had decided not to interfere either. I walked past, holding a tablet in my hands, as if checking the sound or light. No one recognized me. The coordinator nodded. Everything was ready. The flash drive was in place. The projector was programmed. And then, for the first time, I felt a shiver. Not in my body, in my heart. Because at that moment, I realized that now I'm not just ruining their evening. I'm returning to where I was destroyed, with words, with lies, with smiles. Now I'm breaking into the past and making it present. The ceremony began as expected, flawlessly. The lawn was bathed in the soft light of hanging lamps. The flower arrangements looked like they had been handpicked in the early morning hours, somewhere in Tuscany. The guests were sitting on white chairs, discussing who had arrived with whom and how beautiful the bride was. I was among them, a little further away, in the shadow of the tent. No one paid attention to me. I was not on the list, not standing in the center. I was the background, the very shadow they had forgotten. Like everything around me, I was part of the picture, but only I knew at what moment this picture would come apart at the seams. Vera walked out of the house to the music, slowly, with a forced smile, with a carefully choreographed gait. There was too much effort in this image. The dress was tight, impeccably white with a thin train. Her hands were shaking barely noticeably, but I saw it. I always saw it. Mark was waiting by the arch, holding the ring in his hands. His face was focused, serious, but there was no nerves in it, only confidence in the finale. They were both sure that they deserved this moment, that they had been through the storm and now, finally, deserved the sun. They stood next to each other, and the whole crowd held its breath. It was then that the presenter smiled, gave a sign to the coordinator, and she turned on the projector. The first image flashed on the screen, a black and white photograph of Vera and Mark, taken earlier by one of the guests. They looked at each other, smiling. Everyone thought that a slideshow about love was about to begin. The audience froze. Vera nodded slightly. Mark straightened up. The guests prepared for applause. And then the second picture, a screenshot of the correspondence. "You overslept me today," written on behalf of Vera. Next to it is a photograph, clearly not taken for the public eye. The third image is a customer complaint. The caption, "I bought a brooch. The stone fell off after 2 days." The seller did not respond. And another one. And another. Then, a fragment of the store's internal reporting, where it is clear that part of the income is not indicated. And all this, alternating with cute photos of the couple, published earlier on Vera's blog. The silence in the room was not just tense, it was thick. People started turning to face each other. Someone giggled nervously, thinking it was a prank. Someone started whispering. Vera didn't get it right away. Her lips continued to smile, but her eyes started twitching. Mark frowned, stepped forward, turned to the coordinator. But it was too late. The last video was short, a fragment of a recording from the restaurant's cameras, where he, even before his official divorce from me, holds Vera's hand and kisses her neck. The date in the corner of the screen was the very day he said he was at a night meeting, and then it all collapsed, but not loudly. No one screamed. There was no hysteria, just faces. Some were squeezed into an evil grin. Others were lowered into their phones. Still others were expressing pleasure at someone else's failure. Vera stood like a statue, pale, untidily beautiful in her white curse. Mark took a step towards her, as if he wanted to take her hand, but she retreated. And that was all. All that was needed. No scenes. No words, just this one refusal to touch. I turned and walked away before the screen went dark. I didn't want to look at the aftermath. This wasn't my victory. This was a restoration of reality, a return of the long silence to its place, no longer in me, but in them. Let them live in silence. Let them listen to the whispers of those who used to applaud around them. I didn't ruin their lives. I simply turned off the music to which they danced someone else's song. Already in the car, as I was driving back to the city, I was overcome with fatigue. Not relief, not euphoria, but fatigue. As if I had been dragging a stone on myself for the last 5 years, and only now had I allowed myself to let it go. I didn't know what would happen next, and I didn't want to know. This story ended not because I wanted it to, but because there was nowhere else to drag it. But in this silence, for the first time in a long time, I heard myself. Without their voices, without their looks, only myself. And that was enough. 8 months passed. The city had changed again, or perhaps I had changed, and the streets looked different now. I was working again, but not with the same obsession with which I had thrown myself into things before. I no longer ran into other people's problems to avoid hearing my own. I made decisions as before, but now there was less anger in them and more moderation. My colleagues said I had become softer, but they did not understand. This was not softness. This was a comeback. I didn't follow Vera anymore. I didn't go to her blog. I didn't ask our mutual friends how they were doing. I let it all be. Because revenge never gives real relief. It only frees up space. And what you put in there is up to you. I decided to put in silence. Not the kind that breaks, but the kind that heals. Sometimes I still thought about that night. How she stood there in white, surrounded by people who had turned away. How Mark stared at the floor, silent, realizing that they had both lost face. I didn't feel sorry. But I didn't feel angry either. I didn't want them to suffer anymore. It was enough for me that they could no longer hide behind illusions. I met him by chance. He was not like Mark, not in appearance, not in demeanor. He did not have that artificial confidence that hides the fear of being exposed. He was quiet as rain. We were sitting in a cafe discussing books. He did not know who I was, and it was the first time in a long time. To be just a woman, not a judge, not the heroine of a scandal, not a shadow from someone's past. I didn't make plans. I didn't look for new beginnings. I just lived. And this, oddly enough, turned out to be the hardest thing. To be here. To be myself. Without defenses. Without drama. Without war. Sometimes silence is a punishment. Sometimes it's a salvation. But for me, it became a starting point. An emptiness that finally made room for light. When everything was silent, I finally heard myself, and she began to breathe.